Welcome in to another episode of the Armchair Illini podcast. My name is Alex. I am the owner of Armchair Illini, and typically I don't host. Austin Berkland is our usual host, but he is out on the road for Thanksgiving. So I decided to pinch hit for him. Feel free to drop some feedback on how I did. This is actually my first time hosting a show. So I hope this episode is as good as how Austin does it. But we have a great guest preparing for our Uconn game this Friday, November 28th. We bring on Mark Zanetto, the owner of Big East Energy, to help us preview the Uconn Huskies game. Hopefully, there is no 30-0 run. Before this episode came on, I actually did a little bit of a rewatch of that 30-0 run, and I stopped at maybe about 12-0 run mark. Once Alex Caravan got to the rim, Donovan Clingan stuff quit together, I decided to stop. So hopefully the vibes are a little bit better for this episode. Before we bring Mark on, we do have our first sponsor. It is Hamilton Walker Seafood and Spirits. Illini fans, the Armchair Illini podcast is fired up to team up with Hamilton Walker Seafood and Spirits, the best dining experience in all of Champaign-Urbana. We're talking about prime steaks, fresh seafood, and a vibe that's perfect after a big Illini win. For football season, what we're doing is we're giving away a $100 gift card for every home game. So our last one of the season is actually coming up this week versus Northwestern. That will be going up tomorrow for $100. And then through basketball season, throughout various times, we'll be giving away $50 gift cards. So check out Hamilton Walkers on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And be sure to enter our giveaways. We're doing that quite often. So with that being said, let's bring on our guest. We got Mark Zanetto. Mark, how you doing, my man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for joining. As I was saying, the last time Uconn and Illinois met, it was a little bit of a tough one for Illinois fans. Obviously, that year, Uconn went on to win the national championship, their second in a row. Mark, do you remember that 30-0 run?
Yeah, I can't even tell you how many times I've rewatched it. You mentioned doing a rewatch of it. I think most UConn fans have rewatched that at minimum 10 times just because of the gravity of it, but also that team was just so fun. Like I know that ended poorly for you guys, but it's not even just that game. That entire season, that team's ability to be what Dan likes to call bulletproof, where you score and you also hold the opponent to nothing, right? With these 10-0 runs, 20-0 runs, ended up being a 30-0 run with you guys. It's just definitely it was a joy to watch. And it's been a grind since that national championship. Last year was a tough one. And then the first 6 games of the year, it's been a little uneven, and we'll get into why that is coming up shortly, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think what was so tough about that team was you got Clingan in the middle and you got all these perimeter pieces, and it was just such a well-oiled machine. That first national championship, I think you guys were definitely gritting it out, but that second time, it was like a hot knife through butter. So with that being said, though, how has this year so far, I know it's only been about 6 games, compared to last year and even that national championship team 2 years ago?
It's been an interesting run. I'm getting some heat from UConn fans because they played yesterday or Sunday. I know we're recording this on Monday evening. So like on the weekend, UConn played a bye game against Bryant. Not a good team, but a competitive Bryant mid-major team that's going to probably win the America East, and they just didn't look good. And they also don't have Terrace Reed right now. He is supposedly supposed to play on Friday. So if you're watching this and you're thinking you're going to get a break with no Tarris Reed, it may or may not happen. Dan's been pretty, day to day on that stuff. You may actually see the first appearance of Braylon Mullins, who is a 5-star recruit that they believe is going to really kind of take them to the next level offensively. But it's been an uneven 5 of 6 games. They played stretches where they look very similar to that unstoppable team of 23-24. But they also have played stretches without Terrace that looks very similar to last year's team, which was just struggling to get into their offense, missing a ton of 3-pointers, not feeling like the fire is there. I know that this game against Illinois in Madison Square Garden will definitely ratchet things up a little bit, but it's been uneven at best.
Yeah, I think a big thing that I was looking at going into this matchup was whether Tarris Reed would be available. Obviously, Illinois has pretty deep size with the Avisage brothers. One of the Avisages is struggling with an injury, coming back. David Mirkovic, who's the power forward, who's one Big Ten freshman of the week as well. So I look at Tarris Reed as a guy that kind of makes or break this team's matchup, because I was looking at the Arizona game. The rebounding margin was won by Arizona 43-25.
Mhm.
So without Tarris Reed, how big is the UConn front court outside of him?
It's not particularly big. You do have freshman Eric Riva, who's 7'1", but he's about 230, 240. He's not he's not like a thick kid. You know what I mean? Like Terrace is 6'11", 270. He carves up a lot of space. And then you have a bunch of 6'8", tweeners. You have Alex, who could play the fourth in a pinch, Alex Caravan. You have a transfer, Dwayne Karoma, who is trying to do his best, but he's playing a little above his weight class when he plays against high major teams like in Illinois or even Arizona last week. So that's going to be honestly, I'll be 1,000% honest with your audience. If Tarris Reed plays, it's going to be a really high level game, and UConn has a really good chance to win. If Tarris Reed doesn't play, Illinois should win the game, and I don't know if it'll be convincing because as we saw with the Arizona game, they got up by about 12 points, and then UConn clawed their way back into it. So this team is really reliant on their offense and the rotations and the action that Dan and his staff have created for them. Their guard play is a million times better than it was last year, but without that guy in the middle that essentially he basically just is a magnet to the ball. He grabs every rebound. He brings so much attention to himself down low. You have to double him. If you don't, it's easy buckets. And if you lose that, then it creates this inability for UConn to get spacing that they want. And I think that is where Illinois can really take advantage.
Yeah, and kind of going into the perimeter, I think Dan struggled last year after Steph Castle left, and I remember Aiden Mahaney had a lot of offseason hype, didn't really work out that great. But going into this year, I know Dan ripped up the stat sheet after the Arizona game, but how have things looked in terms of Silas Demory, solo ball, and those guys on the perimeter? Because I know Dan really needs obviously the guy in the middle, but then the perimeter pieces. How have they looked so far?
Silas has been good. I wouldn't, it's been 6 games. It's hard to create a profile for anyone in just 6 games. I know that you could probably say that's not true if you're talking about, Darren Peterson or one of the guys that may be a top, 3 or 4 pick in the draft coming up next year. But in terms of UConn, and I don't say this with any pretension, and I don't say this to try to sound elitist in any way, but Dan's offense and Luke Murray created this offense, and it's incredibly complicated. And they look at this like they need, like they have a quarterback that has multiple reads, and they need someone to make the right read the majority of the time. And they want that with everybody in their offense. So Silas has done a pretty good job of that. He's a bigger body guard. He's 6'5". He had a triple double against Bryant, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, 10 points. But he probably should have had 17, 14, and 10, if I'm being honest, because his teammates just are kind of letting him down a little bit. I think Solo's in a slump, which could be one of two things for you guys. He could break out of that slump and go for 7 of 7 like he did against Marquette last year, and just like have a 25-point game and go nuts in the Garden, or it continues. Um, a guy like Malachi Smith coming off the bench, the Dayton transfer, is a smaller guard. He's been a nice little change of pace. They don't have any issues at point guard like they did last year in terms of running the offense. What they're lacking this year is, in this short period of time where we watch it, is the flow of offense doesn't feel the same without Terrace in the middle. Eric Riva will be an absolute factor in this game. He had 16 points against Arizona. He had 16 points against Bryant. He can shoot the three. If you leave him open, he can knock it down. So it'll be an interesting dichotomy of which team shows up. Is it the team that played Arizona tough without Terrace, or is the team that looked like they were disinterested against Bryant?
Now, I think last year, just following UConn on the side, there was definitely a different vibe, I thought, in terms of Dan Hurley, because there was a lot of offseason talk about him going to the Lakers. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of talk about him going, for the three-peat. And he just seemed a little bit displeased with his team, especially throughout the beginning of the season. I remember in Maui when they lost 3 games. There's definitely a lot of just anger, so to speak. And I think
Yeah,
this year is a little bit different. Um, Based off of what I've seen, he seems like he's satisfied with this team. I think a lot of national guys have said, Dan feels that if this team does what it's supposed to do, they could win what they expect to win at UConn. And even in press conferences, I think it was either today or yesterday where he said we're going to eat the tryptophan on Wednesday
that's
instead of
right.
Thursday. So there
Yep.
just seems to be a different vibe. Would you think that's the case?
Yeah, I did a show. I recorded a show this afternoon or this morning that came out the morning of today's recording, where essentially I said, I was more pissed off about the game on Sunday than Dan was. And that's probably a good thing because number one, I feel like if Dan is lighter, then I just think the team responds better to him when he is in a better state of mind. And I think that last year, I read his book. We pushed a lot of it on our network with O'Connor. He's a friend of the program, and they wrote the book together. It's a great read. If you're a basketball fan, forget if you don't like Dan Hurley. Even if you want the audio, like the audio is really good. It's a great read, and because it takes back to it, you kind of get an understanding of like why he is the way he is, and why he's so obsessed with the way he is. So if you're interested in like people's psychology, definitely check out Never Stop. I'm not a paid endorser. I have very little access to the team, probably for good reason. They don't want me on the inside. But no, I think for me, I like this version of Dan Hurley, but I also, if I'm being completely honest, like there's a part of me that it gets frustrated with him talking almost like double talk, right? So at the beginning of the year, he basically said, we have a lot of well-resourced players, and if they don't play up to their capability, I'm going to sit their ass out. And last night, I felt like that was the case. And you don't really see a lot of the quick hooks or the tough love that we get in the press conference, which is probably a good thing. But he does. There's kind of like a media savviness that Dan shows that I didn't think was really there until you start to cover it every day. And then you see that he truly is, he's just really good at his job. Like he's such a good coach. He's such a good X's and O's guys, but there's not a better guy in a press conference than Dan Hurley. There just isn't. Like he wins the press conference every day, no matter whether they win or lose. So I love covering him. I think he's a great coach and pretty honest, but I would like to see the coming to fruition of the things that he tells us in the media more than just kind of like giving us the red meat for the fans. The hey, if this guy plays like shit, we're gonna take him down. You know what I mean? Like it's just
Yeah.
it feels a little hollow when they play like they did against Bryant. But I also could just be overly critical. I'm very aware of being probably kind of a perfectionist myself, so maybe that's part of it too. I really think this team can be good, and so when I watch a game that's uneven, I do kind of shake my head at like why that is.
Yeah, definitely. And I also have to bring up the clip where his wife was saying, I asked him to take out the trash, and Dan responds, Does Jay Wright take out the trash? I think that's hilarious. But
They have
going
a good
into
relationship. They're funny.
yeah, they
They are.
complement each other well.
She's a pistol and she's cool as hell. They call her the Queen of Connecticut. She plays into it. It's done in a very tongue in cheek way, and she does amazing things in the community for underprivileged kids. So she's a phenomenal person in Connecticut, and obviously a really good ambassador for the university as the wife of their biggest head coach.
Yeah, definitely. And looking into the schedule, at least in the next 6 games, UConn's going to play at Kansas after they play Illinois. And then there's certain games like Florida, Texas. So it's quite a big stretch. And obviously they played the Arizona game just recently, but the Illinois game seems like the start of a pretty big stretch for UConn. So what's the feeling heading into this game versus Illinois as UConn kind of starts to gear up for that pretty massive gauntlet of a schedule?
I think it's good timing. I think, you have this whole week. You play the game on Sunday. You have all, this break where, like Dan was saying, like they're gonna do Thanksgiving on Wednesday. So they have a day to kind of recover of the kind of the food coma that everyone is in on a Thursday, right? So they play on Black Friday. And It'll be a huge pro Uconn crowd. I know the Illini travel. I know the fans will. I know there'll be some orange in the audience too, and because it's considered a neutral site, I'm sure there's plenty of folks that are going to be rooting against UConn in that respect. I'm sure if there's St. John's fans that are buying tickets to the game, they're probably going to be rooting against us too. But I do think it's going to be a good test because to me, Alex, when I look at y'all's team, like my biggest thing is like the size that you have, not just with the Avisage brothers, but like between Andrei Stojakovic, Peja Stojakovic, one of my favorite players of all time. I love Andrei's game. To having a kid like Kylan Boswell, who even though he's 6'2", is built like a linebacker. You have some bigger dudes that aren't just we look at the Avisages and they're Eric and Zvonimir Avisage are essentially like the same profile. They're about 7'2", 240 pounds, but they're pretty. They're Euros and they're more like stretch fours than they are fives. And so without Terrace in there, you're putting Eric under the boards when as he should be. He's been a pretty decent rim protector, but he's not the athlete that Z is. He's more of. He's got great footwork. He's got great hands, but he doesn't jump particularly well in those instances. Great footwork, a really good, and is going to be a great 3-point shooter. He made 2 of 5 against Arizona, and they were daring him to shoot, and he made a couple big ones. I think that game gave him confidence that if that happens against Illinois in the Garden, where they kind of play off of him, he's probably going to pull the trigger faster. So I think that was maybe a blessing in disguise that Terrace is out for this type of game. You'd like to think Terrace is back. When they had Terrace at full strength against BYU, they went on a run against BYU that reminded most people of, and myself included, of what they can be. Because when this team is at full strength, a guy like Alex Karaban, who is not a first option, has never been a first option, but I've called him the best role player in the country. Because when he's the third or fourth or fifth guy, and then all of a sudden he drops 21 points on 4 or 4 from the field from 3, he gets lost, and he's open, and he knows how to move, he knows how to cut, he knows how to slip, he knows where to put guys in position. But if he has to be the second option on this type of team, that's when the UConn offense starts to slide back. So that to me is going to be the key. Does Terrace play? How does that affect the rest of the team? And I think it's going to be a really good backcourt battle. But I do think that the Illini have a little bit of a size differential, even in the backcourt too. Because who's going to guard Peja? Maybe Jay Stu or Peja, Andre.
Yeah.
Maybe Jalen Stewart. But even then, I think a combination of him and Jaden Ross potentially to guard 2 guys. I still see the edge to Illinois there. Who do you, on your side, who do you think is gonna is Boswell gonna guard Demory, or is that point guard to point guard, or is he gonna mix it up?
I think the question is, I think Kylan's going to move around the game because I think that he usually gets the kind of the leader of the ship, so to speak, at the beginning, and then and on different points of the game he gets switched up because versus Texas Tech, he at one point he guarded JT Toppin. So he was guarding Christian Anderson at some points. He was guarding Lawan Watts. And then JT Toppin was going absolutely nuclear. So Kylan Boswell took the lead on that. So I think I could see him, starting on solo ball because I think solo ball is kind of the head of the snake there at the beginning. But I think if things get tough and like you said, Karaban gets going, then I can certainly see Kylan Boswell guarding Karaban. The biggest question for me is how locked in is Andrei Stojakovic going to be on the defensive end? We saw in the Texas Tech game, he completely locked down Christian Anderson, who's, was playing like a first team All-American at the beginning. Stojakovic held him to 8 points, 3 of 11 shooting. But then the past few games, and, for those listening, you can see it on our channel. We kind of broke down the film. He was asleep on defense for a lot of the times, and Brad Underwood called him out in the last game after a game versus Long Island, a quadrant 4 opponent. So if Stojakovic is locked in, I think he can be the second best defender on the perimeter, but it's kind of what he wants because we know he can score. And that's what he's done in 2 years at Cal and Stanford, but logging in on the defensive end is going to be key.
I think we have a coincidence here, because I feel like both of our top scorers, or what they're supposed to be, are Stojakovic and Solo Ball. Solo has not been that guy in the last few games. He's shot 20% from three in the last few games. So the issue I have is, and the issue I have with Solo mostly is he doesn't defend. So when you have a game from him where he doesn't give you much offensively, he's a liability on defense. So if that's a similar profile to Stojakovic, so that could be a wash. Let's just say they both shoot the lights out, fantastic, boom boom, we're all happy there. It really probably will come down to Boswell versus Demory and how they get the other guys involved. I'll be honest with you, Alex. If Boswell is guarding Alex Caravan, you guys are in a lot of trouble, because Alex is 6'8", 240 pounds, and if that and as stubborn as Dan can be at times, if he sees that, he'll literally just go down low to him and he'll back him down. And Alex has a decent post game against smaller guards, and also he's pretty fast in terms of, like, when he's guarding a guy like Boswell, who I wouldn't consider him speedy. I think he's quick. So I think a guy like him can be neutralized by a kid like Caravan, because even though where he lacks maybe some lateral movement, against a quicker guy like a Dylan Mitchell would scare me against Alex because of his quick twitch. But Kylan is more of like a straight line to the basket, try to bully you, and you can't do that against a guy that's 6 inches taller than you. So I do think that there is it's going to be just an interesting matchup. I mean, my X factor for you guys is I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but Ben
Humrickhouse, yeah.
Humrickhouse. I mean, basically a shooting guard, small forward at 6'9", 230. He can shoot the three, averaging 10 points a game. I really like his game. He's the type of guy that if he was available, Dan would try to lure him in the transfer portal if he can play any kind of defense, because he's tall, he's big, he can play multiple positions, he can read and react to defenses. He is maybe almost like a hybrid between Alex and Jalen Stewart. So I think, to me, that's the really interesting part, is if he plays really well, then you guys have a chance whether Terrace plays or not.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a really interesting game. I'm not sure how it's going to go out. I think it all depends on whether Terrace Reed plays, like you said. But
1,000%.
Let's get into our predictions before we wrap up here. Let's say Terrace Reed plays.
Yeah. Okay.
What are we going for in terms of Illinois versus Uconn Friday night or Friday? I think it's Friday afternoon.
I think it's a noon game, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. Friday at noon at the Garden, MSG, day after Thanksgiving. What do you got?
Well, I think we have a Discord where we have a pro handicapper who does betting for us, and I don't know what the line will be because it's too early in the week. If Terrace plays, I think UConn is about a 5-point favorite. If that's the case, I would take UConn, and I think that they'll win by 2 possessions. So whether that's 6 or 7, I do think if Terrace plays, their offense just plays at such a high level that it's really hard, no matter how good a defense is, to stop, because there's contingency plans. So if Silas is playing well, then they dump it down to Terrace. Boom. If that's working, then the defense reacts to that. Then open threes. If that plays well, it's like, you know what I mean? Like there's multiple layers to it. And you saw that in a streak against BYU and in a 44-3 run against UMass Lowell. I know that's a really bad team, but 44-3 run is kind of crazy.
Worse than the 30-0 run.
Yes, yeah. But there was a 20-0 run in that game, and we were like, oh, is it going to get to 30? And it stopped at 22. It was 22-2. I always get a kick out of Evan Maya, my buddy that comes on the show, when people say, well, what's a 30-0 run? He always says it's a Husky.
It's a Husky.
And so, so I don't think we're going to see a Husky in this game, but I do think that UConn, if Terrace plays, will win the game by 2 possessions, maybe pushing it past that, maybe late game, to 10. But I think it's a back and forth game for the most part. But if Terrace doesn't play, then I think it's a pick'em game. And I personally, I'd pick Illinois. I'm just being, I try to be as objective as possible. I have an emotional connection to this team that goes back to when I was 9 years old. So I've been watching this team for almost 35 years. So there's definitely some biases with how I talk about them, but good basketball is good basketball. I watched Illinois play the other day, and I think they're a good team. I don't know how you feel about Brad Underwood. I think you guys could maybe do a little something there, but I do think he's doing a decent job. But that's maybe a talk for another day. What's your thoughts on your prediction of this game?
Yeah, I think let's say Terrace does play. I'm going to pick the Uconn Huskies just because I feel like they're a little bit better gelled. I don't think Tomislav Avisage has had enough time. He got his tonsils removed. He missed a large part of the summer, and then he had a pretty significant knee injury. They're talking about him possibly missing the season, and he came back last week. Whether that knee is holding up, we don't really know. But I just don't think that there's been enough time for him to gel just yet. And I still got to see the consistent two-way effort from Andrei Stojakovic. I think he will show up because it's a big-time game. It's an MSG. He just got publicly called out, so I do think that Stojakovic brings his A game. But if Tarris Reed plays, I think that that combination of Solo Ball, Silas Demory, Caravan, Jay Stu, I think that's all a little bit too much length, and a little bit too much physicality for Illinois to handle. Because my problem with Illinois is I don't want them to turn into a finesse team. I
Mm,
need them to turn into a little bit of a grittier squad. And with a lot of Europeans, unfortunately, they're going to kind of trend towards being more of a finesse team, which is fine. But I think what wins in these big kind of games, especially early in the season, is a gritty, tough physical team, and I think UConn has that. So I'm going with the UConn Huskies. I also think that we could see a little bit of a shootout like we did versus
sure.
Alabama. And I certainly think that's possible. They just went back for trading buckets. I could certainly see that with the UConn Huskies. So I'm excited to see what UConn does, and I think um, if healthy, UConn, I'm really really high on them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good assessment. UConn's not exactly the toughest team in the league in the Big East, and I've again been getting killed by UConn fans for calling them soft. But you know what? If you need a target to get mad at, and people want to get mad at me, that's fine. Hoops Cat Pod on the Big East Energy Network is where you'll find me almost every day, at least 4 times a week. So
Yeah.
we definitely feel the wrath of both opposing fans and our own, because UConn fans are very aggressive.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining. Like I said, hopefully no 30-0 run or nothing close to that for either one of us. But where can people find your work? I know you mentioned Big East Energy, Hoops Cat Pod, but where can people officially find you and all your work?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and thanks for having me on. Anytime you want to chop it up, I'm happy to come in. If you guys are playing other Big East schools, we have multiple people we can send your way, or if they're not available, I'm happy to jump on. And that's on the Big East Energy Network on YouTube. That's our YouTube channel. If we have playlists and podcasts all through that, and my specific show is the Hoops Cat Pod. And I also do the Big East Energy Weekly Show once a week with the co-host of Roll Jays, Casey Matthews, who used to be on the staff there at Creighton. So we have quite an eclectic group. So even if you hate UConn and want to just hate watch, feel free to jump on. But we have the only teams we don't have covered are St. John's, Providence, and Marquette. But everything else we have in our stable, and we're obviously looking for more people to join us every day.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Armchair Illini podcast. Hope I did a good job pinch hitting for Austin. We'll hopefully be back sometime later in this week before the senior day for football. But with the holidays, TBD. So thank you again for checking this out. Go Illini.